everybody, and welcome to part 2 on comics and faith and all of the wonderful things, as Hector is going to attempt to interpretively dance through this entire section to give you an idea of what it's like to practically put your faith into practice when engaging with comics and faith and culture. How dare you let me down this quickly, Hector? How dare you?
I hear that so often in so many arenas.
So anyway, we talked kind of in part 1 about the importance of comics, the intersection of faith, and just how they function as those tendons, those connective points for community and for culture in general to engage. And I know the question I get a ton, and the question that you get 47,000 more times than I do, is, cool, I've read your stuff or I've seen your stuff. I've heard you guys talk about the concept of faith and culture and everything, but how do I does the same thing so that I can have an impact wherever I am or with my small group of nerds that love comics as well? So I think for this conversation, a great place to start is probably going to be, Hector, how did a young, naive, very naive Pastor Hector go, I can make all the things work together, that ultimately led you to your first book, and then your first book made you go, I should go to conventions? So for those of us that aren't talented enough to write a book,
you are.
Hector just let us all know that apparently we are.
You are.
Self-publishing is a thing.
It is.
And Amazon helps you with that. You know, listen to the podcast, or we'll start a podcast for Hector on how to self-publish your Devos. But yeah, so what brought you to the, I should go to conventions, but not, I should go to conventions and like throw Bible passages and devos at people as they pass. But you actually took the approach of, I'm going to take a table out as an artist. So how about you tell us a little bit about all of that for people that don't know the convention scene for comics, and how that became kind of your pathway as one of your practical applications?
So for the bulk of cons, there's not usually a big spiritual presence. And one of the most constant spiritual presence are negative street preachers. Yeah. I don't even really refer to most of the ones that I'm referencing as street preachers. They're more just like Jesus hecklers.
They're very angry Jesus people.
Like the one that just threw me was like when I was at San Diego last year, there were literally, the street preacher was just like, you smell bad, you live in your mom's basement. I'm like, what? Like literally,
but Jesus loves you.
None of that. It had a verse about hell from Revelation, and the dude was just talking trash. It was rough. So, but that's a lot of the presence at cons. And I remember it was Heroes Con, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's the comics purist show. It's not a pop culture show. It's a comic show.
It's a comic show for sure.
And it was Heroes Con 2013. And I went there. I'd done some cosplays and different stuff while I was at Heroes Con. But I just remember literally standing on the floor of the convention center saying, I can be a positive spiritual presence here. And I was like standing around looking at the endless aisles of people and cosplayers. And I'd actually had some Jesus conversations with some people I knew that were cosplayers. And I said, I can be a positive spiritual presence here. So I said right there, I'm going to have the goal. I'm going to write a book between now and the end of the year of devotionals. And I'm going to come back next year as an artist and set up my booth to do it. And the reason it was that way, instead of just like passing out free things, one, if you try and pass out free things at a convention center or at a con without a table, you'll get kicked out.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid recommendation.
If you just walk around trying to pass out free things, even if they're good free things, you'll get kicked out. Two, most of the stuff that people just hand you when you're walking around, you don't hang on to it. It's at some point in time you're like throwing it away. So if I had a book, a table of like, hey, I'm giving out free things, it's not the deal is if people see that you consider what you have to offer is worthwhile and that you consider yourself as an artist, then you have the same rights, liberties, and opportunities as everyone else on that floor. So I thought the best route, and I prayed through it, the best route to really be able to minister to that convention center crowd. And it was only going to be the one time. It was honestly more of like a mission trip than a long-term ministry. And so I wrote the book, went through the publication process, did that. The book published in like January, and the first big con was in May. But it actually had built up some buzz between January and June. And some other stuff had kind of popped up with that, but for sake of discussion. And I wanted to do that because at least if I didn't sell a bunch of books, there would be people seeing a visible, kind, compassionate presence that actually liked the same things that they liked. And if they wanted to have conversations, they could have conversations. I wasn't going to force anybody. I wasn't going to yell my Jesus sales pitch at them. It was going to be like, what's this? I'm glad you asked, and then have a conversation. And that honestly started out with how that went. The first year I did it went so well, like crazy well. And before the first day was out, I'd already got invited to other cons, and people are saying, we need this at this show. Con said, will you come do a church service at our con? And, just kind of opened doors where I had planned it to be a one-time thing. It opened and it developed. And then I think the first year total, 2014 of cons, we did 5 shows that year. And I think the second year we did 20 shows. And just kind of escalated from there. And I think last year I did church services at 8 cons. And it's been that thing. And it went from just being a positive light and discussion for the attendees. But then one of the biggest things that developed is actually building relationships and ministering to the other artists in Artist Alley. Like when me buying a booth to be able to communicate freely to the people in front of me turned into, I have 2 people on both sides of me that I get to have conversations with for a whole weekend. So instead of having small conversations just with the people on the other side of my table, I actually get to have conversations with the people beside me. And that's been like the base of what the ministry of like the con ministry of Faith and Fandom has been. It's been panels and stuff like that. And one of the other end of it was when I did Fanboy Face Off and Clever Movies and stuff like that. I was a screenwriter for them, which that came from the first book. Like that I never sought that. Somebody read the first book and said, hey, you know what you're talking about with nerd stuff. Work right for us. That opened doors to where there were cons that actually wanted me to be there for that instead of Faith and Fandom. But, it opened the door. So I still had more opportunities, and even shows now that I don't set up a booth at, they still have me come in and do chapel services or panels or stuff like that. So it's built a foundation of it, but that was my way that I felt was the best route for me personally. That doesn't mean that that's not the route for everybody, because I know LTN gives, they have the booth where you give out lanyards and
primarily the layout for Love Thy Nerd, and for a lot of folks watching today, they know that our presence actually came from what used to be a booth-based ministry in Game Church to what evolved into right now, which is actually a little more of us individually, wearing our prideful shirts and all that stuff, pride in a good way, that people point out and go, yeah, you're with the LTN folks. They're all over the place. And that the things that we're going to try to hand out are, rather than things that could potentially get thrown away or forgotten, are going to be things that are useful.
People want to hang on to them.
Right. So that's why the lanyard became such a huge thing, because how many cons have you been to that give you janky lanyards?
Or if any lanyard at all.
Right. So it's like, unless you're at San Diego or New York, Because Baltimore does not give you one. Heroes, I don't know. It depends, but usually you got to be like at a New York or a San Diego or a C2E2 to get like a really awesome lanyard. And you hand a bunch of vendors a quality piece of lanyard, they put that garbage on immediately. And
Yes.
that garbage immediately turns to solid gold, and they wear it everywhere, which has your stuff on it. And people can connect again to that relationship that you created in a moment. And I think that's the part that everyone that's watching different tracks of stuff here at LTN Con this year, or heard a lot of different conversations last year, or just know LTN's existence in general, is it's all about that relationship building. That is the platform that basically you've heard other LTN leaders. It's something that I say a lot personally, is you got to earn that right to speak the gospel into someone's life. And a lot of that comes from, hey, we like the same cool, similar stuffs. And so there's a bunch of different ways to approach conventions. And I think one thing that should be drawn out right now for a lot of folks that might not have thought about it is the panel issue. Is if you don't have the ability that someone has graciously reached out to you and been like, you should do a panel on XYZ. That happens when you're known in some local communities. But almost every convention allows you to pitch a panel from 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour. And honestly, from both of our experience, from con running to being to a lot of regional to local to even national shows, most of them, when they hear, wait, faith in comics? Tell me more. And if you have a pretty good plan, they'll be like, I've never heard that before. Why not? Let's see how many people show up. That for a lot of folks, even for the biggest atheists out there, they'll be like, I don't got it, but I want to claim that I've got everything. And I mean,
That's I have been the token.
Yes.
Like the token Jesus, so we can check it off. Like one con, I'll remain nameless, had basically a sin tonight, repent tomorrow sales pitch, where they had like drunken parties all throughout Saturday night. But don't worry, we've got church on Sunday morning with Pastor Hector.
You'll be fine.
But it's been that. But like, and you might get some hesitancy pitching panels. But as long as you honestly, if you have integrity and you aren't coming across like a douche waffle, you'll be fine.
See, it's the little things in life, but don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. And like I've had, and don't be offended if they want to check you.
Yep.
I've had more than one showrunner want to call me and have a conversation, or get a video or audio of a previous panel just to make sure I'm not abusing people. And you know, and that's the thing. I've got a track record enough now, and I've even seen other people, sometimes with and sometimes without my permission, running a full faith and fandom panel complete with the logos at other cons. And you know what, if it's getting the gospel out, great. But one of the biggest things I want to tell you or to encourage you is that you can pick your own lane and do things differently. Like Eric Anderson, that's over with the 42 book, and it's another series of, and God Terraforms All Things. Like he's got another set of geeky devotionals. He focuses a lot more in on the cosplay end of things.
Sure. Yep.
And you know, I like cosplaying, but trying to tie that to this isn't where I'm at. It's just too much for me. There are people that work, you know, as you're going to see through all the other great people in this this event, there's board games, there's video game stuff, but like being able to tie that to it. And if you want to just pass stuff out, if you want to have panels, however you want to do it, just know that the only person that's going to qualify you to do these things is God. You're not going to have somebody else come up to you and say, hey, we think you have the qualifications to do this. Take the steps you want to, and go at your own pace with doing it, because there's really no guideline for this.
Right.
This is just you being faithful with the passion and calling you've got in your life.
And it's taking those opportunities, because a lot of shows really have tons of time of content they need to fill. So if your thing isn't creating content and getting a table to sit in Artist Alley like Hector's done in the past, Maybe your pathway is going on an LTN mission trip, or just in your own community, being that person that goes to be a shining light in a dark place, because a lot of these conventions, they're just not used to seeing Christians in positive lights, which means, having your love thy nerd stuff or other church adjacent type stuff actually gets you a pathway into it, because the most amazing thing about conventions, and this is true of tabletop conventions, comic book conventions, video game conventions, music conventions, enter your favorite fandom here, is that when every single person steps across the threshold into the magic of the show floor, it's like everybody suddenly becomes one. And it's the strangest experience for a lot of folks that if you haven't gotten it, but it's one that a lot of us are dramatically missing this year in 2020, is that
it's what the church should be.
Right. It's literally a group of people that could not possibly be more geographically, socioeconomically, racially, every potential defining feature of a human being could not possibly be different, but we all show up for the thing. And everyone's willing to talk about the thing that they really enjoy no matter what. And that's where we get to then bring rubber to the road of sharing how those things interact with each other and why, as Christians, these things are amazing to us. And that's why if you can find your way into a convention, whether it's via a table, while it's going on a mission trip, it's finding your way to give panels or be that spiritual influence. A lot more places are looking for folks to do like nerd churches or something, even just a regular chapel service on Sunday, that depending where you are, especially if you're in the southeastern part of the US, too easy. Most people are like, Jesus, got it. We got to do that. But there's even more things that you can do. That as a showrunner, one of the way that I got into anything that I did was I was like, I love the comics and I want to do more. What can I do? And they were like, volunteer your time. I was like, tell me more of this volunteer time. And that was everything from helping set up, literally running ticket lines. If you see random volunteers running around at any show, usually they have cool shirts that say volunteer or please abuse me. No, that's something different. That's most of that is free labor at most places, because what they do is they take that opportunity to get entrance to said show. That's usually the trade-off for most shows, is you volunteer for a certain amount of time and you can get a ticket to the event. So that's a great way if you don't have a ton of money to gain access to shows, is to volunteer up front and get your passes and everything. But it also gets you introduced to the showrunners and to a lot of artists and whatnot. And that becomes your pathway to building relationships and getting to know folks. And then that can even transition further to a lot of larger comic book stores use volunteers for events at their shops, which again gives you access to folks like free comic book day, except for this year. Man, 2020 is really starting to get me down. That free comic book day is like comic book Mardi Gras, depending on how big your store is and where you are. And I was at a very large shop, so we would do, a month's worth of inventory movement and sales in a single day, usually when free comic book day came around.
My first ever Faith and Fandom event that I sat up at was a free comic book day, and they had professional wrestling in the parking lot.
Yes.
Like the full ring wrestlers. They had a tent with video games, cosplayers, and me. And
look, everyone, there's going to be wrestling and Hector.
But that's the thing.
Wrestling Hector? No, wrestling and Hector.
If you give me the opportunity, I'll go. But like this with you did your book club at your shop, and
yes.
You did that. You worked there, but
yes.
Realistically speaking, that's something you could sales pitch to any local comic book shop. I've got 2 local comic book shops in my region. They carry my books, and that's one thing, but I try to intentionally, and if you listen to our podcast, I've been more focused on investing in them today. Like today, I drove to a comic book shop. They didn't have what I wanted, so I bought other stuff just to put money in their hands. But like this past 2 weeks ago, one of our local shops actually had vendors and artists in their store, and I got to say, the doing that in that shop was a better day for me than like the last two cons I did. So cons are a big out there thing, and some people are intimidated by them. You getting involved in your local comic book shop is a game changer. It really is.
A lot of shops love their local community because without their local community, they don't exist. Comics in and of themselves is not a high profit margin business. People do not get into comics to get rich. If I broke any dreams, I'm sorry, but unfortunately it's one of those things of on the retail side, or even as a creator, there's just not tons of money in it. So it is a labor of love industry, top to bottom. You can make a living, that is for sure, but it's not like private jet money. We're talking gas money for that car that's hopefully paid off, kind of thing. You know, do the Dave Ramsey thing and you get your comics and your car payment and it's all good. But supporting that local shop gets you a lot of access, because a lot of owners really respect their clientele that get that it's not an easy industry, and 2020 and COVID has not made it easier. That it requires people that truly enjoy these things to come to bat. And I'd say one of the most powerful things that a lot of folks have done this year, or if you haven't this year and you're looking for something to do, is one thing that my wife and I did immediately when it looked like we were going to go into a lockdown type situation where businesses were going to close for weeks on end, was our friendly local game store and our local comic shop was like, oh, please come spend money. And so it seems like overly simplified, but it's true that you just open your wallet a little bit. And, you know, we bought a month's worth of stuff in a day instead of spreading it out because we didn't know what was coming next. And both of those shops have survived here. Lots of shops across the US and Canada and the world have not. And we're closing more comic shops right now than are being maintained, because of elongated closures and all that. So something as easy as just picking up a physical book or an extra book or picking up older trades is going to open a doorway to that relationship with those owners, that you can then start having the conversations of what else can I do to make your life easier? Or, hey, would you like a book club? I know book clubs are kind of great because I hope I can bring 10 people, which means you're going to sell 10 trades of whatever I'm reading that month.
Especially if you tell them that you'll order the books through them.
Yes. No, yeah. Don't do the Amazon thing. Sorry, kids. This isn't about saving money. This is about supporting the local business. If you want to make enemies incredibly quickly, start a book club and then show up with all the books because they'll know where you got them.
One thing too, just to add to all of this, is that longevity, playing the long game versus the short game, makes a big difference. Show up consistent. If you have a passion to actually reach out to that community, show up, like, you know, commit a couple years worth, because there were artists, vendors, even showrunners that said that they didn't talk to me for the first 3 years I did this, because they weren't sure if I was real or approachable or trustworthy. And then like they actually bit in and did that. My local shop didn't invite me to have my books in their store until I'd published like 5 books. So it's, you know, it's not always going to be popped off the bat receptive immediately. But one of the other things that I'll just say too, like if you have a heart to do this, you need to do it with the idea that it's going to be like starting a small business or anything else. You are not going to see, or maybe you will, but don't bank your level of success on immediate responses.
Right.
You need to be comfortable knowing I'm planting seeds for this season.
Yeah, a lot of times, and a lot of what you'll see in the convention circuit especially, is if you have 1 or 2 major shows that come through your area, or you can get to easily a year, it means you're going to spend 3, maybe 4 days back to back getting to know people. And then a year is going to go by until that show comes back. Now, if you're lucky enough to get to travel or do multiple regional shows, or you choose to travel, you will then run into a lot of the same people over and over again. I've likened it to what had to have been what the old days of like vaudeville and like old circuses used to be. Because it used to be, you know, you remembered when vaudeville acts were coming through town or when the circus is coming back, and the enjoyment of having the circus in town for like a month or whatever, because you created friendships during that time period that were explicitly around that thing. And some people are like, I really don't understand. And I'm like, yeah, it's a really old reference, but it's the concept of, we have convention families. I have people that I only know in the context of the comic book industry because of us standing in convention centers across the US, from coast to coast, and then online throughout the year, that thank goodness for Facebook and stuff like that, that this is now, instead of having to wait a full year, if you're lucky enough to get behind the veil of some of the celebrities in the comic space, most of them are approachable upon you meeting them. You then get to have conversations year round with some of these folks, but getting to see them where most of us don't sleep for 72 plus hours at a con because we're literally catching up with people, and trying to put even 10 people into 72 hours to catch up with, when a lot of us know 30, 40 artists that well at a show. There's a lot of times you feel like you just don't get to everybody. So it is a long-term investment, but let me tell you, it's super fun because a lot of creators in this space are genuinely awesome human beings. And you will find a lot of really neat people in this space. You'll find out that there's a lot of people that actually feel the way we do. There's a lot of Christians that are on that side of the space that, just by the reality of their industry, they're a very small minority in a very large pond that doesn't usually agree with their position in life. And so you have people that are explicitly open about their Christianity, Hector, Faith and Fandom, setting up a table, to guys that, you know, when you start talking, they'd be like, yeah, no, bless you, and thank you for what you're doing. It's like, wait, hold up, you're one of us? And it's because they've gotten used to having to be quiet in an industry where, you know, they feel they can't be as open with themselves. But some of them, their work speaks for itself and can get away with doing both. And so it's really neat space, because you're going to find tons of persons of peace or people that actually agree with us and are really fun conversations, to people that are like, you crazy, that's not how any of this works, but you're all right. You're not totally insane. They're like, the guy that's throwing things at people out front with the sign that wants to hurt me, saying the end is nigh, is really kind of painful to this existence. So yeah, cons are just amazing, but yeah, definitely never forget your local opportunities in either local small shows, because it doesn't got to be the huge convention center downtown.
I do a lot of my most effective ministry in tiny shows.
Yep. Some of them will literally be at flea markets. Some of them will literally be at your local library. Some of them will be on the front lawn of Hector's property, because he's like, forget this 2020 mess. And he had front lawn con a week ago now. A week ago.
It was just this past weekend, and so it was great.
He did some stuff. And so you can get creative with this stuff, because people are missing their community right now. So a lot of it for us right now is thinking, how do we come out the other side of COVID? How do we continue to engage people in an environment where most of us have been face to face in our existence at cons? We go to be around other nerds, dress up like nerds, and go to panels with nerds. And I just need a hug.
on the community, on the end of it, it's one thing too, but like, I know that everyone's watching this, listening to this, is not going to be an extrovert.
Right.
And I am an extrovert, but even in a con, I feel like overwhelmed, and I love having a table as my little bubble to hide behind. Mm. But let me just encourage you, if you feel a call to do ministry in this field, but the idea of a convention scares the poop out of you, please understand, there are more private ways of doing this.
Yes.
Do a blog. The Hoot and Howl is a blog that does a really great job with this. And I see her stuff mostly on Instagram. Mm-hmm. She has a blog that runs well. That you've got people like Geek Devotions that do video and podcast devotions and stuff like that, where it's not necessarily in a con setting, but they have a consistent thing with that. Listen, podcasts, writing your own blog, making your own podcast, reading your blog on your podcasts. I mean, literally doing stuff that you don't have to have a big audience, but I would just encourage you, be consistent, be faithful,
Mm,
and don't be concerned with numbers.
right.
You legit don't know how many people are affected by what you do. And one of the things that I've seen most effective with faith and fandom, even more than all the cons and everything else, is usually twice a year I give away all my books for free digitally.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
a couple thousand people download them twice a year. I don't know all of their responses, but my stuff's going out there. So if you have a heart to create or a heart to reach out to this, um, look at your surroundings, look at your circumstances, and see how does it play out for you.
And some of it could be just as easy as just supporting your local store, which means going in and buying an extra comic a week, picking up that trade that you weren't going to pick up, finding out if he needs help just like on delivery day, because some of those stores don't have extra staff for when they got to go through stuff and do polls.
If you're good at social
Um,
media, offer to do their social media, because a lot of comic book shops
totally.
have terrible social media.
Yeah, websites and social media usually is something that a lot of shops need help with. But I mean, another way that you can gauge is local libraries are also growing places where they're getting more into realizing that comics is a great pathway to help kids learn how to read. So being, that superhero that literally can bring comics to, because a lot of the big comic publishers provide trades to libraries to increase readership and all that. So a lot of the time the stuff is there. You just may need to start a book club or reading to children. That this is one of those that literally, if you can think it, you should probably try it, because there's just so many different options, and that's why we can't possibly cover everything in the time we have with you for today. But always know you can reach out to Love Thy Nerd, to Hector, or myself personally, and that we would be more than happy to help all of you figure out what are the things that you want to do to get engaged in this group of folks, because we wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't fun.
And
It's
and
a
it's just,
blast.
I mean, even if it's just as much as doing a small Bible study group with your friends
Yep.
and using comics, even if it's not in a comic book shop. Todd Turner, who's one of our people active in LTN, he hosts a
Hi,
small group.
Todd.
Hi, Todd. He hosts a small group and is just doing big things. I've seen lots of people, Corey, different people that are doing small groups, and some of them use my devotionals, some of them use other people's devotionals,
Yep.
but the material is out there and you can do it yourself as well. And even if it's just as I said this, if you ever want to use my books to do a small group, email me, I'll send you the PDFs. And there's a lot of other people willing to give you resources.
So it's literally, if you can dream it, if you can build it, they will come. So don't feel barred by anything, because the sky literally is the limit. Just don't ever be afraid to ask, because especially in this space, if you don't ask, you will never know. If you
Chris
ask,
is a better asker than me.
yeah, it's
like
fair.
real talk.
Sometimes it's, you need to find your friend that you're like, who knows this and is willing to make introductions.
Find your Aaron.
Yeah, because there is a ton of folks in this space. They're like, oh, you just need to talk to so-and-so, or you need to talk to so-and-so. And a lot of that is just getting in there and building those relationships and getting after it. So if you haven't figured it out, the theme of LTN Con and LTN in general is build those awesome relationships, and God is going to open tons of doors for you to be able to do unbelievable ministry in ways that you could not have imagined. Because if you had asked me 7 years ago when I started this journey, that I would be doing ministry in this space, I'd go, the what now? And so don't ignore those little things where God's just poking you back. Go ahead. No, seriously, do the thing. Because I sit before you today as a guy that was in the process of church planting, that is now hopefully in the process of building a geeky ministry center where I'm going to read comics to kids and teach them how to read and play games and video games with them, while showing them the beauty and realities of the gospel and just what Christians are supposed to look like in this very broken world. And I would have straight called you insane if you told me that even 6 months ago. So it's amazing what you can do for the kingdom in the geek space in general, but comics is a super easy pathway, because all you have to do is have a love for really cool art and reading stuff and sharing that with one another. So Hector, I don't know if you have any parting words of wisdom for everybody, but I think that was our LTN talk on comics and culture. And it could have had 100% more Hector doing interpretive dance. But we just want to thank you all for listening. And as you got questions and everything else, hit us up, because we're here to help you become better locally and feel empowered to do all the cool stuff that God has for you. So, as they say, if you know, read more comics for sure. See, this guy gets it. So thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of the convention, and we will see you out there being nerdy for the kingdom.